Hi, welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Rich Hilliard, and today we're talking about student debt with Theresa Alt. Theresa is the secretary of Ithaca DSA and a member of the National Political Committee. So, by way of an introduction, I mean, a lot of people have probably heard about student debt. It's in the news fairly regularly, maybe. Can you just give us a brief outline, some numbers?
Sure. It's a huge problem in this country. 37 million people owe student debt. That's something like 1 in 9 Americans. And not all of them are young. Some of them are the parents of former students. Total student debt in this country has passed $1 trillion. It's higher now than credit card debt, or consumer debt, as that is called, which is pretty astounding, since it's something that it's a form of debt that in the past was not scarcely supposed to exist, that in other countries of the world is not supposed to exist. There's an average figure of 26,000 per debtor, average debt. Although the real problem is that some people owe so much more. The other problem is that so many people young people who owe student debt cannot get the kind of jobs in this economy that would allow them to pay it back.
I mean, we're seeing people with all sorts of degrees, 4-year degrees, no matter what it's the nature of the degree, they have it's more the nature of the institution, private or public, that determines the amount of debt that they have. You could have a dance degree, or you could have a biology degree, and they could come from the same institution and they'd be roughly equivalent, would they not?
You mean the same? It would be the same amount of debt,
right,
probably,
right.
And
even though the
ability to
pay back
might not be the same.
Right.
I was going to say, when you said depends on the nature of the institution, I was going to say that gets really, really confusing, because some of the institutions with high sticker prices are also the rich ones that can give more aid,
are the most
sometimes.
Generous.
So the numbers are extremely confusing.
So a lot of the aid comes from the institutions.
And
a lot of the loans come from private lenders.
Right. Some come
from the federal government.
Many from, but I think 3/4 or so from private lenders.
So what is the effect that this has on young people trying to get jobs, college-educated young people?
Well, the effect on college-educated young people is that they are forced to scramble for the jobs that have the highest pay, regardless of whether those jobs are at all socially useful. I mean, this is one of the things where we see so many people going into the financial sector and doing things that are completely unproductive and sometimes downright antisocial. But that way, they, from banks, from brokerage houses, they get the kind of salary that does enable them to repay their debt. And people are completely dissuaded a lot of the time from working for not-for-profits, maybe teaching, doing all sorts of really useful things that give lower pay. But the problem starts way before. In fact, the first part of the problem is, you might say, all the young pre-college people who don't even try to go to college because they're so...
Because of the price tag.
Yeah, who are completely deterred by the amount of debt they would have to incur. These are often low-income, kids from low-income families.
Who may be the kids, if they have good grades, that would most qualify for aid, not just loans, right? I mean, I've heard that
Well,
cited.
yes, but so much of, unfortunately, nowadays, to such an extent, loans have replaced aid. Yeah, they're the ones who in the past would have gone to colleges and received a lot of aid. And now they're told to get loans. And obviously that's a pretty scary thing if your whole family doesn't have the money. And the second point of effect is, and we heard about this on a previous show, so I'll from a Cornell administrator. So I'll try to be brief, is that once in college, kids feel the pressure to take the courses that will get them jobs or that are perceived as leading to jobs afterwards. And that's also always
So
interesting.
there's a sort of a pipeline.
I mean, I myself actually tried to make that decision in college long ago, even though it wasn't a question of debt. And found when I got out with the degree that everybody says, well, you're guaranteed a job, that I wasn't. And, the estimates had been wrong. And I wound up without a job in my field. And a third thing that our then guest, Ian Shackner, pointed out was that a lot of kids are really afraid even to speak up, to speak their opinions, because afraid that, something they say could follow them and cost them a job after graduation.
Is that what's preventing, is there a sort of feeling that that's preventing students from organizing on
That
this
was
issue?
his impression, yes.
The sort of fear of
Yeah.
not getting a job.
Yeah.
So what sort of relief mechanisms are there for this debt?
Yeah, it's not, we've just painted a really bleak picture. In fact, it's not totally bleak. There are some possibilities for relief, largely from some executive orders by Obama. It's the income-based repayment programs. It's pretty, as anything that comes out of the administration, it is very complex. Different for everybody, but for some of those people with heavy loan burdens who work in the nonprofit sector or in government, yes, you can get on a program that allows you to repay. Your repayment is based on discretionary income. Discretionary income is defined as that part of your income which is over 150% of federal poverty level. So not very much, as we know. But so they assume that first 150% of poverty is what you absolutely need to live. What's over that is considered discretionary. And then these programs hold it to something like your repayment shouldn't be more than 10% annually of your discretionary income. And that goes on depending on your status. As I said, this gets very complex for 20 years, for 10 years in some of the best cases. Extremely confusing. And we did another program where we talked with somebody from a financial institution who had a story of where loan officers simply didn't understand the program, told someone they were on it, and when the time came to have the rest of the loan forgiven, it wasn't. Yeah, so yes, there's relief, but it is not all that clear and not all that certain.
Are there less convoluted proposals?
Well, there are three.
Anything coming out of...
I've seen three pretty big proposals out there. One came from Elizabeth Warren, which was, but this mainly apparently concerns the government loans, the Stafford loans that are only about a quarter of all the loans out there, that instead of paying back at commercial loan rates, students should be allowed to pay back at the 0.75% rate that banks pay when they borrow money. In other words, the banks have had so many advantages, have profited so handsomely in the past off all of this, and have done so many bad things to the country that they should simply not be allowed to profit on from student loans anymore. So that's, I think, called the Federal Reserve rate, Federal Reserve discount rate. Banks are allowed to borrow money at 0.75%. Why shouldn't students be allowed to pay back loans at 0.75%? There are also some much less generous proposals that would just let some students refinance back down from 8 or 9% to 7%. As I say, this is something that Elizabeth Warren proposed a year ago. A completely different, well, I shouldn't say completely different proposal. Bill Zimmerman, an old 60s radical, wrote an article recently in which he proposes that, but also proposes an income-based repayment program. And that's important because it's been pointed out that if you simply lower the rate of payback, the biggest, actually a lot of the debt is held by higher income people, and a lot of the relief would simply go to high income families where the loan is just part of all the money that's cycling through. There may be some question there. Are some of those people high income just because they're working in finance to pay off the debt? In other words, with a lower interest rate, would they actually have taken more useful but lower income jobs, or instead of practicing on medicine on Park Avenue, maybe go into public health? I don't know how many people are actually going to make that kind of, especially after they've had a taste of Park Avenue.
I'm afraid a few people,
but probably there are people driven into...
Right, once you make a decision to live on Park Avenue, you may stay, but when you're making that decision, I'm sure...
However, so the Zimmerman proposal has both parts, 0.75% interest rate, but also income-based, because even that could be beyond what some people can afford. However, let me say, first of all, jumping back to Warren, legislative proposals these days go nowhere in Congress, and we know that because the House is completely dominated by Republicans who are never going to go for anything like that. So Zimmerman goes into, how are you going to force Congress to adopt measures like this? And he says the only way is massive civil disobedience. Now, you're laughing. Can you imagine just refusing to pay back? And that was my young people especially, are much too vulnerable to do something like that. I read his article to the end, and it's a little more subtle than that. What he says is we need a huge website where people pledge to engage in this civil disobedience of refusing to pay back at the point where there are 5 million others. Yeah, that's interesting. So
that shouldn't be too difficult of a website to set up.
Yeah, but I must say, I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like that.
No.
I suppose by other tokens, it's I now realize, harmless proposal, in that he says just, making that kind of a pledge that is contingent Although I must say, I think the feds might shut something like that down. You know, in the past, there was a lot of talk about war tax resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, war tax resistance carries penalties,
Yeah.
some pretty severe ones. And I remember thinking to myself, probably, I can't remember, this was probably the first Iraq war or so, well, why don't I just file my taxes legally, but enclose a letter to the IRS saying, one of these days I'm not going to pay because of the war, and send a copy to my congressman. And then I must not have been the only one who did that sort of thing, because I think now if you read your tax instructions, it will say that you're not allowed to do any such thing.
Not even allowed to send feedback?
Yeah. And so I suspect they'd find a way to shut it down, as I said.
Very possible.
Was
You mentioned 3 proposals,
Yes.
I believe. Was there one more?
Well, the third one is Democratic Socialists of America have a national drop student debt project. And it kind of has, you might say, 2 parts to it. And one part is the very modest here and now of urging Obama to extend his income-based repayment program to all forms of student loans and let the government pick up the missing money. And
so to be clear, his initial proposal is only talking about like Pell Grants or Stafford loans, or
well, the biggest, but also I think the limitation is it is only available to people working in a narrow range
in the
of
nonprofit
jobs.
and the government sector.
And that's where the suggestion is, well, extend it, so just get this debt off of students.
Right, okay.
Which doesn't mean of young people, doesn't mean that there wouldn't, this could be quite a stimulus to things like home sales.
Talk about the effect of student debt on the larger economy. I mean, I know it's not entirely clear,
Right.
but if
Sure.
there's $1 trillion, that's kind of like
That's
held over
Right.
potential consumers' heads.
Right. It means people can't buy things. It means young people can't start families. It means young people can't buy houses. They don't have the down payment, they don't have the credit to do it. And that maybe is the biggest thing, that is really saying that people have to defer starting families till it's too late. But as I said, there's a whole second part to DSA, because we're talking about this because we want to educate people about what the possibilities are now. We want to educate people about what the possibilities could be, that something that Obama could actually do without waiting for Congress. But we also very much want to talk about what really ought to be, and what really ought to be is the federal government ought to cover the cost of higher education. This has been done in many countries around the world, in countries that are much less prosperous than the United States. What does it take? Of course, it takes a tax rate on way high incomes that actually brings in revenues. It takes, probably a very useful part would be a financial transactions tax.
Do you think that this is do you think free higher education is more of a economic problem or a political problem?
Well, I think it's definitely a political problem, because in economics, as we know, money goes round and round. I mean, you let potential, money goes round and round much less when it gets holed up in huge accounts of super rich people who, to be honest, don't know what to do with it.
Right. They invested.
Yeah. But typically they play the investments by numbers, which means they invested in finance rather than in useful things. So
back to free higher education.
Free higher education, yes. Or low-cost higher education. And around the world, what we're usually seeing is not that it's free, but that there is tuition, but the tuition is not designed to cover the full cost of the education. It is rather a sort of copay designed to show you that you're getting something, to make sure that you're serious about your work at the university, but also designed to be affordable. So
what other countries have? I mean, do most other countries have such programs in place? What might one look like?
Well, I think what it looks like simply is a tax-supported system of higher education.
Okay.
So it's, once again, not as complicated as the American system. Mm-hmm. With tuition set and public input. In fact, that can be very contentious. Quebec, a couple of years ago, went to raise their tuition levels and faced massive student protests.
Tuition levels,
which were much lower than here.
Something like $2,000 or some very low number. I remember looking. It was it was like a sneeze.
Ditto a couple of years ago in Croatia. They, again, government raises tuition. Students shut down the university.
So it sounds like organized students are a very big part of dealing with this problem.
It's organized students, but it's also people who have grown up with the expectation that they will not have to mortgage the rest of their lives to do what is socially very useful, namely get an education. So,
it seems almost as though education is viewed as, something as a privilege that, I guess from our perspective in the United States, it's a privilege for the select few that you get to go to a higher institution to earn the chance to enrich yourself. Rather as being seen as something that is a part of the social good, something that's productive.
Right. And in fact, I suspect that to some extent when they come up with statistics about how getting an education helps you to earn more money, actually what you're seeing is if your parents could afford to send you to college, they have the connections that'll get you the good job at the end. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of irony in the whole picture. For instance, you go into debt, you study, say you get a PhD, you want to go into an academic career, and now the universities are more and more putting teaching in the hands of adjuncts who are actually very low paid. We were a couple of years ago looking at some of those numbers from Ithaca College, and yeah, it was a living wage by the living wage definition, but it didn't allow you to repay a student loan. And you knew that if you qualified to be an adjunct, you probably had heavy loan payments to make.
And you're sort of part of a downward trend in your own field's
Right.
mobility.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
in a couple of years, you'll be looking for a job and competing with the adjuncts.
Yeah.
That's all.
So anyway, Democratic Socialists of America has a campaign on. It's a national campaign. You can go to our website, www.dsausa.org/drop_student_debt, and sign a petition that goes to both parts. Obama should expand the income-based repayment program to all debtors, all student debtors, but also the United States should move toward free higher education. And when the weather gets warmer, you may see some of us out on the streets with these petitions as well. So,
Well, thanks for coming by, Theresa. To your own house. I'm Rich Hilliard, and we've been talking with Theresa Alt about student debt. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. Thank you.